a very warm welcome on a very warm Monday afternoon. I'm Dr. Helen Eastman, the Artistic Associate of the APGRD. Thank you so much for joining us for this event, which is co-hosted by the Archive Performance of Greek and Roman Drama at Oxford University and Live Canon. And this is the second in this reading series where we are hearing poets who are working on new work inspired by the ancient world, be that ancient myth or ancient literature. It's a real opportunity to see what people are working on, what people are writing, and to have a dialogue, an active dialogue between writers, practitioners, creatives, and academics. So thank you so much for joining us. There is an opportunity to ask questions. If you are watching on YouTube and you want to ask a question, if you're logged in, you'll be able to just put a question in the chat and that'll get relayed through to me. And if you aren't able to log in and post it there, you can email it to the APGRD, and I think Claire will post that email address for you into the chat now. So thanks so much for being here. We've got an incredible quartet of poets today, and I feel absolutely privileged to get to introduce them. So without further ado, we're going to move on to the poetry. And the first of our poets today is Mehmet İzbedak. Mehmet's a playwright and a poet, and in his daytime jobs have included being an academic teaching developer at SOAS and a sessional lecturer at Birkbeck. He became part of the infamous Malika's Poetry Kitchen in 2014. That's an incredible London-based collective that was founded by Malika Booker and Roger Robinson and is now run by the indefatigable Jill Abraham. So it's always a pleasure to be collaborating and coordinating with them. Mehmet's also a member of the South Bank-based poetry collective Tideway Poets, and working on a translation of the Polish poet Halina Poświatowska's works. But today he's here to read from a new pamphlet he's been working on of poems inspired by the myth of the Minotaur. So I'm absolutely delighted to be able to hand over to him and to spend 10 minutes in the labyrinth. Thank you so much, Mehmet. Over to you.
Thank you very much. The following poems, there are only four or five of them, will be about a Minotaur, about the 21st century Minotaur. The same poor creature, neither man, beast, nor god, personification of urban alienation, living trapped in an urban labyrinth. The first poem is Minotaur Waits. Minotaur waits. Venus is about to emerge from a Mediterranean of late commuters. The place is the entrance to Brixton Station, a time, late July evening. A southwest London Marxist is marketing his dialectic wares. Two witnesses at attention next to the watchtower stand. Minotaur is waiting. He has waited like all of us, all of his life. The galvanized song of the one-man steel band sings that love is floating among the particles in the air. Minotaur is kicking his thoughts around as if it were an empty can of Coke. He waits the way one waits for the 59 bus, for life, for death. She has become the Babylon of his dreams, flying freely in his mind. The storyboard he visualizes changes from one second to another. Excitement and fear are not aligned. What will she be wearing? He imagines the chic kiss of her summer dress. Let's find a candlelit corner, exchange anecdotes and whatever makes her smile. Minotaur just doesn't want to bring her back to his flat. He wants to bring her into his life. Urban Aphrodite emerges from her Mediterranean. Minotaur and his Polish neighbor. Not a sentence, not a question, not a saying, just granite words. Notice of mortgage payment change. Minotaur's brain seems to have gone manila. He draws a deep sigh. He knows that he is to remodel life. Minotaur's neighbor, Jurek, call me George, lives in a garden flat. Below Mrs. O'Brien, the book is regular. Jurek, call me George, gives Minotaur a wave as he hangs his fabric conditioned shirt on the washing line. Minotaur nods and sleep reads ARM, adjustable rate mortgage. He'll have to recalibrate his outgoings and hopes that Call Me George won't start another version of his best meal, the frozen cat by the barbed wire, and how he smuggled it into the infirmary. Mrs. O'Brien, who has heard this more often than she had heard hot coal cannons, knows the master chef details of the cat raised by committee. Minotaur will just have to recalibrate his leisure outgoings, a good excuse to leave after one Friday after work. He starts measuring work days in takeaway coffees and stale meal deal sandwiches and missing weekend gyms and late night keema kaharis. And of course, Minotaur could pretend not to need a telephone upgrade. Mrs. O'Brien of the evening mass and late husband potted in ash in her bedroom prays to thank Mary, Mother of God, on Urek, Call Me George's behalf. Urek's theology, however, is quite simple. God knows where to find him if he wants to chat. Minotaur only sees his tattooed number on sunny days. Minotaur woke up late. That morning, Minotaur knew that he wasn't dead when he woke up feeling like the leftovers of a party, with just a mild but pleasant erection. A cup of coffee seemed in order. That morning, Minotaur had not woken up as a bourgeois scarab, helpless, black, glistening in a suburban household in Prague. No such Facebook luck. That morning, he did not wake up as the verb, or the alpha, or the omega, bringing him closer to divinity. No instance of introspection, no infinity of the moment. That morning, he woke up and knew that they would be speaking in greater silences, and gape like children at the sky and clouds, kick through piles of dead leaves on the way home. That morning, Minotaur woke up to realize that they had both changed, and that she was his new lover in an old love, and that one should not mix drinks at a party. Minotaur at night. Angels soar in the neon-afflicted heavens, and the realms of dreams and love sonnets. Minotaur sighs. Demons inhabit his crevices. Demons inhabit the crevices of the real, hiding within the shadows, behind windows, under soft pillows, in the cracks between floorboards. Minotaur wants to sleep. Traffic noise refracts in his head, and he cannot close his eyes. Like a cat, the night brings in dark thoughts and drops them before him. Minotaur sits up, looks around, and switches the electric light on. The wings of Azrael cast the shadow that leaches onto him. Minotaur turns on the disembodied voice of the late night radio. He opens his book as if he were opening a dungeon door into daylight. Minotaur is writing a poem. Second page of an A4 80-gram faint ruled margin block, 1/3 of the way from the top middle left. Irreversible, irreversible, irretrievable, irreversible. Life is irreversible. Everything is irreversible. Nothing is irreversible. Negation of a negative. No. Life is irreversible. All right, therefore time is irreversible. Nietzsche, bless his fluffy moustache, thought that time was circular. Minotaur is watching a gaggle of split-dressed, max-factorized women perched on stilettos who are calibrating and celebrating at the far end of the Montague Arms. Poem is not an object, it is an act of seeking, an act of finding oneself. Minotaur smiles as the plump, monobrowed Madonna with aquiline nose and thick-rimmed glasses is snickering flirtatiously with her two men. Two emotions becoming one, two becoming one. Three Mormon-suited solicitors are yipping and yapping about Friday, while Minotaur focuses on the faint ruled block. Your mind drifts, you feel a kiss on your lips, trembling like a living thing. Minotaur decides it's time for another pint, and whatever flavor of crisps a poet should have. Minotaur needs to talk, which is my last poem. Minotaur needs to talk. Minotaur stands by the traffic lights. Where is God when you need him? It's like the buses. Minotaur shouts out loud in his head, as is his wont. Minotaur seeks and needs to talk to God. It is time they had it out, to know where they both stood in the scheme of things. For God speaketh once, yea, twice, yet man perceiveth it not. Or was it the other way around? Minotaur feels like screaming, but that would scare the 5'2" mother waiting to cross the road with a child in a blue-green tartan pushchair. Minotaur wants to talk. Minotaur, still in his head, lets out a broken glass scream. The child in the green tartan pushchair leans forward and makes faces at him. Minotaur smiles, sticks his tongue out. The lights change, so does the cast. Minotaur crosses the road and goes into the underground. station. If there were no inner God, you would have to invent one.
Thank you so much, Mehmet, for such a glorious reading. As someone who has spent far too much time waiting for the 59 bus in Brixton, the idea of the Minotaur existing in that labyrinth and madness that is Brixton Market is absolutely wonderful. And thank you for the privilege of sharing new work with us. It's really special to get to hear something that's new and in development, and that's going to be a whole sequence of Minotaur poems, which is absolutely extraordinary. Thank you. I've got so much I want to ask you, but we're going to save our questions till the end.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm absolutely delighted, therefore, to move on to introducing our second poet, whose work I've been really privileged to discover and get to enjoy, and I'm absolutely delighted they're with us to read today. Kim Dane is an award-winning poet, playwright, and fortune teller. Their work is widely published in a range of anthologies and magazines, including the Valley Press Anthology of Prose Poetry, Ink, Sweat and Tears, and Neon. They've been shortlisted for awards, including the West Yorkshire Playhouse Airplays competition and the Wicked Young Writers Awards, and they are one of the winners of the 2020 Outspoken Prize for Poetry. They're a recent graduate of Durham University, where they studied classical civilizations, and now they're working towards their creative writing MA at Newcastle, where they're currently based. They produce and write audio drama through Crow and Kettle Presents, and their work sits at an incredible fault line between poetry and theatre, a place where I'm always very excited to be, and so I'm absolutely delighted to hand over to Kim.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to read. I'm just going to try and share my screen. I've got one long poem, which I think will take us through the reading, but if I end up with a little bit of time at the end, I might add something in. This is Alexandros, or written from the Alexander romances. Dramatis personae. Alexander, pretty boy, wine drunk, divine, his father's son, whoever that is. Thessaloniki, the mermaid with very, very sharp teeth. Her grief, pure as a mirror. Callisthenes, nephew of Aristotle, court historian. I'm sure he's just fine. Fathers, plural. Freud is going to have something to say about this. Mother, when Alexander conquered the world, his last unfinished desire was to see Olympia again. Hephaestion, the only thing that ever conquered Alexander, second to wine. Temper, his 33rd year. This is Alexandros, or The Death of the Historian, myth-making for dummies, fragment incomplete. I put the sister in this because I want the impossible, because grief makes mad women of us, because once she arrived, she wouldn't leave, and swims in this poem like a goldfish round a bowl. Here she is now, scaled to her belly, soft, webby hands, through alcoholic Greek waters, swims. His sister, 1, Thessaloniki. Zeo Basileos Alexandros, se kai Basileo taikon kuro kure. Chorus. If we tell her the truth, she'll split us clean in two. If she catches us with our lying faces on, best not to think of it. Instead, let's tell her a story. He lives, reigns, conquers, fucks, whatever, paints his eyebrows on in the morning. Why not? Drinks coffee with the Sultan, lays drunk in the gutter. A man like that dead? Not a likely, sister. He stepped out for a cigarette. He'd write, but the ink runs in seawater like blood. He's busy. Alexandria via Teesside, via the Kingdom of Heaven, lunch with a giant spider and Queen of the Amazons. Besides, stamps are expensive. He has to miss you, irreplaceable sister. Another child can be made, another wife or lover procured. He'll never have another Thessaloniki, not with your shark smile, your faint whiff of kippers. Of course, no brother of yours could ever grow back. Was it you who told him how to do it? Miss Sister, sea maid, when did Alexander learn the trick? When was death undone? 2. Horoscope for July 356 BC. This month is exceptionally auspicious for the birth of conquerors, tyrants, manlets, sons of horned snakes, and friends of Dorothy. He'll look nothing like his father. Odd-eyed like David Bowie, maybe he's Napoleon or Meryl Streep, any bourgeois thing. Today, Cancer, as every day, beware of your father. Which one is up to you? It is a great day to change the entire course of history forever. There's Jupiter in Aries, Cancer in Ascendant. How lucky your mother had a wizard for a midwife. If you're going to have birth mansplained to you, better be someone that can do parlor tricks. Pull a rabbit from... never mind. Regardless, I see a man no one will resist. 3. Note on the nature of Thessaloniki's immortality. He could have drank the water of life, but he washed his sister's hair in it. If you believe the legend, their blood doesn't touch. If you believe the legend, the water was lost and Thessaloniki's red guilt doesn't reach this far. But you can't unmake an angry woman. Imagine unsinking a ship. 4. All through his campaigns, Alexander wrote to his mother. Mother, I'm burning the bridges so there's no turning back. There are treasures too many to name, but hunger eats away at us. Mother, I think I'll conquer the world tomorrow. They say the map doesn't stretch this far. We are past the elephants, past the Brahmin, past all sense. Mother, I found a city made of brass, streets flashing under the desert sun. At noon, it unfolded like a flower, gleaming with automaton girls pouring water into metal wells, bakers of metal bread, metal steam curling from the kettles. Mother, I found a mine full of strange stones. The stones tamed sorceresses and magnetized gold. Mother, I built a diving bell. The fish are the size of cities and have teeth like church spires. Mother, do not fear for me. There is always another shore to wash up on. 5. Big fish story. Let's recap. He survives for days inside a bell, uses a cat as an air purifier, a chicken to tell the time. The fish are this big. He's taken to the impossible lands where men have eyes in their chests, wander about with their heads unscrewed. Ask him, if you can, how he returns. Ask him where fairyland leads. Gets all over the place, that boy. Sips margaritas with a dozen queens, laughs with Diogenes, ties us in knots and cuts us loose. You know, he's in the Talmud. The story of King Solomon's throne, the griffins lifting him to heaven, God wagging his fingers, saying, he's not the Messiah, he's a very naughty. Welcome to the Alexander Show. We'll spin the wheel of potential fathers with a chance to win divine favor, test the limits of man, and see our hubris as a sucker punch. It's a fairy tale, Bosch's favorite Monty Python sketch. Herodotus was the father of lies, filled Egypt with giant ants. Even Thucydides exaggerated. But like this, who would allow it? 6. The historian. Callisthenes says nothing. He's very clearly dead. Chorus. Who unstuffers truth, unspins a yarn, arranges the inquest? Which of us draws history's first chalk outline? For God's sake, Callisthenes! The chorus prop him up. Apply sunglasses, a Hawaiian shirt. Atta boy, give us something to work with. Facts a thin morsel. We've got a story to fanfare. What's that? Alexander's gone native, demanding prayer, wearing comfortable clothes. Some evenings he forgets to be mortal at all, just fury. Locks you up, throws away the key. Thessaloniki. He didn't do it. He wasn't there. Bales Caracas. Bastards, hell will have you. Chorus. If we had our way, she wouldn't be in this bit. But where history fails, myth grows. We can fork our tongues, announce the man is not to blame. 7. Alexander. The story is a wild geranium, moving this way and that. For half Persian princes, Egyptian pharaohs. Imagine a man, the rightful heir, a philosopher, wherever he goes. The birds bend to omen. The cities open their gates. He goes in disguise. He's a convert to whatever is sold. Pagan snakes, Jewish laws. In Ethiopia, he speaks to God. He's king, conqueror, image, alchemist. His blood is ink. His being is this faint halo of light. We can say he went looking for ancestors at Achilles' shrine. We can say the treasures of Persia turned to ash with his lover's body, that he never saw his mother's face again, except in dreams. In the terrible night of the world's edge, with God peering down through strange white birds. 8. Finale. Is Alexander the king alive? Chorus. Imagine drowning a man in it. All that gold. His lungs are a fraction of gold light, his golden face preserved forever. It is said they put Alexander in a vat of honey. It's said he's still in the sand somewhere, growing sweeter all the time. Thessaloniki. His tomb is clean like a god's, he does not lie dead anywhere. Chorus. There are barnacles over her ears. The omen said he was a goner, but Fishlegs is in denial. You can kill him any way you like. Make finger guns and he crumples, poison him a dozen times. Watch as he drinks himself to death. Thessaloniki. Show me a body and I will show you my grief. Chorus. Careful. She's a sea change, a gorgon, a monster. You can't come this far and not get answers. So avoid the clause. When she asks you if he lives, instead say he survives for all time, dead and not yet dead. But that's not important. Say, what's he like? She has no choice. Thessaloniki. He's whatever you want. This is Alexandros, or you might call him Alexander. Boy wonder, Sekander, Al, a boy you would have known, a man you would have hated, make him parable, gay icon or killer, he's still missing out there somewhere, still asking prophets for the date of his death until he vanishes into the telling. Just remember, if you ever see a seaweed girl, her head bobbing in the waves, teeth glinting, you can part your lips, tell her about the man who was Thessaloniki's brother. And that's that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that dazzling reading. It was absolutely joyful to get to hear, and so exciting to see all the playfulness with form and using that incredible mix of dramatic forms and poetic forms and prose and the chorus. It's really, really exciting. So thank you for letting us into that work. And I know that there's lots of people who are going to be blown away and want to read much more. So thank you very much. And I know people have a lot of questions, but I'm going to keep us moving forward to our third poet today. This is just an incredible hour. I feel very, very lucky to get to helm the sharing of all this new work, because our third poet is also sharing some new unpublished poems. I've been a huge fan of Vasiliki Albedo's work for a very long time, and I'm really thrilled that she's reading today from Athens, where she is at work and has to wear a mask because them's the rules. And so I'm particularly grateful to her for joining us. Her poems have appeared in many anthologies, including Into the Void, the Emma Press, Fair Acre Press, Cobblestone Press, and in many magazines and newspapers, including Aesthetica, Anthropocene, Ambit, the Beloit Poetry Journal, Lighthouse, Magma, Mslexia, the Rialto, Morning Star, Interpreter's House, South Bank Poetry, the Telegraph, Tears in the Fence, Under the Radar, and twice in the Poetry School's brochure. She's got work coming out from Poetry Wales, Poetry Salzburg Review, and Frontier. In 2017, she won second prize in the Oxford Brookes International Poetry Competition and joint third prize in the Brian Dempsey Memorial Prize. She's been nominated for Pushcart Prizes, was joint winner in the Guernsey International Competitions, Poems on Buses, and commended in the National Poetry Competition, the Hippocrates Prize. Fire in the Oubliette was joint winner of the Live Canon pamphlet competition in 2020 in a book that we went on to publish. It's a beautiful, beautiful book that we're very proud of. So I'm absolutely delighted to hand over to Vasiliki, who's going to share some new poems with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen, for that wonderful introduction and for inviting me to read at this event. I'm honoured, and it's a joy to be here with you all. Mehmet and Kim, those are amazing, exquisite poems that you read, and I'm really happy to be included in your company. My first poem is called Icarus over Athens. I passed the bankrupt, airless office blocks, the sex shops mushrooming the outskirts. I saw a festering crop of factories, gutted farmhouses and the copse, steeped in foxfire and carrion. I saw the bone-white bloom of the magnolia open like a fontanelle, and on I rose, saw landfills creeping on the suburbs, streets fitful with sirens. I saw the city's labyrinth, remembered father's words, but didn't care. I knew the only way out was up. Eos was the goddess of dawn and sister of Selene, the moon goddess, and Ilios, the sun god. She is said to have been cursed by Aphrodite with constant desire. She rises each morning from her home at the edge of the ocean. Sorry about this. I'm at the office, so So she rises each morning from her home at the edge of the ocean, and aren't we all in a way returning to our unending ones every day when we wake up to her light? Eos. Oh God, I'm so sorry about this. I had told them to put the phones down. Okay, Eos. Into exaltation she goes, Eos, goddess of dawn. Her eyes steeped in tufted streams, she drowns her deadpan sister and her sterile glow in the insomniac light of the day star. Forget the moon and her dull cult. It's now that vines turn into wine and necklines loosen over shoulders. She's here and she's fire. Horses run her reverie across the sky, breaking through padded clouds, and at her sight, cicadas chafe, petals dew her pheromones. Her curse she turns into a gift. She whims, she wants, and she will want for nothing. She pours out her sultry light, and flame trees surround her. No gentle wakening for her, no softly, softly. She wants the lot, the aphrodisiac world, men and women in their floodlit homes. She'll have them all. This next poem is inspired by Catullus, his love poems for Lesbia, his humor, and his love of obscenity. Catullus's prayer. Cloacina is the goddess of the Roman sewer system, Cloaca Maxima. O Cloacina, you to whom all things return, take this from me, my spite. I am grim and vulcanized, for I cannot make her mine. All night I turn her in my head. All day I turn under the sun and let it burn her in my thoughts. I cannot cope, cleanser goddess, that I could give it all to you to flow away, ferment elsewhere, that she would find herself where she belongs. And yet there is so little time in which to live and love and feel that I know not if I should pray to you or to Laverna, that she would trip him up who holds her to her wedded promise, which she heeds and then she doesn't. My Lesbia, who tricked me with her charms, took me in, then pissed me out like water in her fountain. I'm interested in gender identity beyond the tensile position of the binary. I started this poem thinking about the story of Troilus and Cressida, which, as you'll know, is said to be one of Shakespeare's problem plays, and that the tone is seen as inconsistent and the audience doesn't know how to respond to the characters, which is an interesting tension in a play exploring various tensions in the context of a war. In the play, Troilus, Priam's son, and Cressida fall in love during the Trojan War, and eventually Cressida is exchanged for a male war prisoner. Priam is said to have had 50 sons and many daughters. I wondered what it would be like if one of the daughters wanted to become a son. The scientific name of the hermaphrodite globe flower is Trollius, of the cultivate Cressida, which gave me a wonderful symbol of unity to end on. Priam's 51st son. For years, I lived as an object. Every time my father saw me, his eyes scanned my body. How lovely your hourglass shape, or you're growing fat, careful not to end up like your mother whose thighs are corn-filled burlap sacks. Or what's this, a spot on your nose that gives it the shape of a caliper? Oh no. I wanted the life of a son, the clap on the back, the galloping laugh, even the strategizing, the filth of a war. So I cut off my hair, my breasts, I tied flat to my chest, wore a chlamys, lowered my timber. But still, what's this? Hermaphrodite bloom, what shall we call you now? Travesty, war from within. And what did I make of this? Why, field, a field of globe flowers. My last poem was inspired by the myth of Arachne, and in particular Ted Hughes's retelling of the myth in his Tales from Ovid. Arachne is turned into a spider after winning a weaving contest and infuriating her rival Athena. I often like to explore the shadow self and darker feelings in my poetry, and this is a poem about envy and what may lie beneath it. I imagined a modern version of Athena scrutinizing her love rival's tapestry of images on social media. It uses some italicized fragments from Hughes's poem. Just a warning that it includes a swear word. Sorry, just a second. Sorry about that. The phone's off now. Okay, this is called Full of Her. After Ted Hughes's Arachne. We'll now have seen too much of her, too much. Her feed is full of her, weaving her tapestry of images. Her ornamental face, flavescent hair, looping as she descends the split staircase of her mansion, and in another clip, plunges the sloping bridge of her nose into a ridgy bouquet. Someone sent her again, in her robe, her fucking robe, so silken and sheer and contrived. Oh, prodigy with her 4 published books. There, her fingers on her own lines, beauty comes from inside, she captions the picture. Or in her glass house, pollinated and pluckable. Or in Alive, triumphantly pulling the drag line after a skydive, in her perfect smile, which is just another flourish, biting into my owl face. And I imagine her now, hornet-lipped, whispering each one of her achievements in my ear. Remember her thievery as I turn 14, and she takes my boyfriend from my hand at her pool party. And now she's tiny, all belly with a dot of head, screw-faced and hideous, and I'm Athena, tearing her tapestry to shreds and laughing in a rage at how much I want her. Thank you. Sorry about the phone.
Don't worry in the slightest. That was absolutely stunning. Thank you so much. And there's something so glorious about poems that can transport us in the way your work does to completely other places and spaces. And yes, you're in the office and the phone's ringing and you've got to wear your mask and everything else, but it's an absolute testament to the words that they can take us on extraordinary journeys. It's exactly the sort of poetry we need right now that can give us imaginative leaps when we're all stuck in and unable to move around. So thank you so much for joining in from Athens and sharing that new work. I know all of us feel privileged to have heard it in its early pre-publication stage. So thank you, and I'm really excited that as a writer you're engaging with that material. And so we come to our 4th and final reader today, whose work I've always enjoyed, and who was reading in our live Canon lunchtime reading series and happened to mention working on something involving the underworld, and I obviously wanted to know more. I won't say too much about it so that he can introduce it, but I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Matt Bryden. He's a poet and a teacher. He's based in he's down in Devon, I believe, at the moment, and he also runs the Somerset Young Poets competition. His pamphlet Night Porter won the 2010 Templar Prize, and his first collection, Boxing the Compass, was nominated for the Crashaw Prize in 2013. More recently, he won the Charroux Memoir Prize in 2019 and the William Soutar Prize in 2019. And he's published widely in journals, including Poetry Ireland, Stand, and Modern Poetry in Translation. and has read all over the place: Latitude, the Dylan Thomas Centre, the John Hewitt Festival in Armagh. In 2018, he created a free interactive online poetry map, which featured 60 poems to prepare students for the unseen poem question at GCSE. If anyone is tuning in who is preparing for that over the next few weeks, then the very best of luck. He has an MA in creative and life writing from Goldsmiths, and this particular project that he's going to share with us today won a 2018 Literature Matters Award from the Royal Society of Literature, enabling him to work on it. So over to Matt. Thank you.
Oh, magic. Thank you, Helen, for that introduction. I'm a big fan of this very new reading series, actually, and I've loved every poet I've heard read in the first edition, and Kim, Vasiliki, and Mehmet as well. So I'm flattered to be asked, actually. I'm going to talk about Lost and Found, which is the project which views it views the Lost Property Office at Bristol Temple Meads station as an entrance to the Greek underworld. And a lot of people I've mentioned this to have said, you know, why would you want to do something like that? And so I thought I'd start by introducing it, as it seems completely logical to me. So a few years ago, I was at Bristol Temple Meads, and I had 20 minutes to wait for the train, and it was perishing. It was winter. And I went downstairs to the underpass. All the shops were closed. It was very late. And the only lights that were on were in through the glass panels of the Lost Property Office, and it was empty. So I went in, and the doors opened, and I sat down, and I warmed up. And after a few minutes, a man came through the back doors. He was carrying a green crate, and he didn't even meet my eyes. He just put down the crate, and he took out a holdall, and he unzipped it, and he took out some smalls, and he took out a hairbrush, and he took out a phone, and he recorded them, and he sealed it all back up, and he put it to his left, tied a tag around it, and then he went to the next bag. And it was a systematic, no-nonsense approach of a nurse when someone has died. So that kind of no-nonsense approach, that professional approach to the intimate, that interested me. And I'm not really the first person to have kind of seen the underground, as it were, as a comparison to the underworld or to hell. So I'm just going to share my screen now and show you what I mean. Okay, so the first thing is, you know, if you just look at that picture quite closely, there's two kind of signs. One is that celestial blue pointing up to the sky, to heaven, and the other is that red warning saying, you know, promising that hell is down there, that you shouldn't go down there. Anton Corbijn took photos famously of Joy Division, looking as if they're descending into hell on the tube. If you go to London, or if you watch Taxi Driver, the film by Martin Scorsese, there's kind of like a lot of play with kind of mirage and heat and shimmering coming out, you know, from the grills during the heat of the summer. But there was that, but there's more than that. There was the arbitrariness of it. So why should one person lose their wedding ring on the train and then someone else have theirs returned? It's kind of like the arbitrariness of fate seemed to kind of hold. The third thing was the mechanics of it. So this is something from A Matter of Life and Death by Powell and Pressburger, where there's a kind of system in place. Just like I say, the kind of zipping and recording. And if you look at the actual position of Bristol Temple Meads, there's 28,000 people go through it every day, 28,000 people. There's 13 platforms. You're in a kind of underpass, and that underpass is, it's a kind of no place. It's a place you pass through to kind of get somewhere of meaning where you want to go. There are steps up, but you can't kind of see where they actually lead to. There are ways down into the lower tunnel, so which I'll talk about a little bit later. But it's a kind of liminal place, a place where things are decided on the way to where you're going. So again, I was struck that this is like the mechanics of heaven. So let's begin with the poem then. This is this is voiced by people who've lost their possessions and are helpless, but it's also voiced by people who are sort of in the underworld and can't be heard by the living. And it's about the arbitrariness of fate for that reason. And the title comes from a common complaint of necromancers, who used to complain that about the quality of the corpses that they would revive to tell the future and to divine, because often the bodies were sourced from the battlefield, and so the kind of vocal cords had been slashed and they couldn't speak, or they were rotting. So this is called From the Lipless Dead. What makes a ring slip a finger? Soap suds, a breeze through a window, disloyal or impure thoughts. Sometimes wet hair will alter a person. I forget how it changes me, a woman says, catching herself as she walks past unrecognized, a towel to her dark hair, the walls buoyed with shades of red. On the Weymouth train, a gold band on a seat, a garland slipped its place. What would you have us do? Throw our voices? The Cerberus padding towards us, attentive to the tread of fugitive ghosts, might advance a kindness, a nip from his keg. Though this beast carries not canister but camera, to steal a soul and leave eyes blinking dust, throats a hard licorice, flash absorbed in the obscura. And so for a year, funded by the Royal Society of Literature, I turned up at Bristol Temple Meads Lost Property Office one day a month, and from 6:30 in the morning to 6:30 at night, and just observed everything that happened. And I also started at the same time teaching myself ancient Greek and Latin. And I came to realize that translations are not the science that I had imagined they were. So, for example, the title of this poem, Wine Dark, the Wine Dark Sea, which is a convention, actually could equally be translated as Wine Bright Sea. And Athena, whose epithet is Glaucopis, I think that pronunciation might be right, Glaucopis or Glaucopis, could be green-eyed Athena, but it could equally be grey-eyed Athena, or glassy-eyed Athena, or even owl-eyed Athena. So this poem is about that slippage. It's about how we can't read the gods, and we can't read fate. There's a reference in here to Apollo being the Lord of Light, the god of light and mice, or Lord of Light and Mice, as Christopher Logue calls him, because Apollo was the god of plague, and plagues are carried by mice. And there's a pun in here from not from me, but from Citroën. My favorite car is the Citroën DS, which in French is a pun, Déesse, which means goddess. And just one more piece of information before I do the poem. It also touches on the 1989 hurricane. And I remember this because my neighbour in Beckenham in London, her skylight was blown off. And that wasn't just the end of it. It blew off onto her car and smashed her car, whereas we were left scot-free just 2 doors down. And it was like, why would that be the case, that we got away with it? So it's called Wine Dark, Wine Bright, Glaucopis, Athena. 1. A god's arrival is a discus toss, holding its level. After all, a god may part time. Take Athena, Glaucopis, her green, her grey eyes. White-pated, leant on a staff, she speaks in hieroglyphic. Her owl's eyes eye Apollo in his mousehole, move the Greeks to move, rather than tell them this. 2. Athena's fingertip tries a skylight, tilts its lens against her finger, fridge walks its pyramid dome to the roof edge and upends it onto the bonnet of a Citroën DS. 3. A continent over, a faltering torch beam pulses beneath the rubble of a school, where a girl's starfish hand cups a canine flecked with sand. It is easy to take it from her, replace it with a styrofoam cup blown conveniently by, snap the fish necklace from her neck, and dust the dust from it. An advert for the school, her kindness. I'm going to read one more poem. These poems, what they tend to do is collide the quotidian with the classical world. So I had a choice of 3 that I could read just to kind of get that idea across. I think I'm going to read this one, For the Laying of Restless Ghosts, which has got a very clear turn from the classical to the everyday. And it comes back nicely to the Lost Property Office itself. For the Laying of Restless Ghosts. We buried 2 stone dolls, one small, one big, substitute houses for the evocated ghost. Cast black beans in possession of souls, cadaverous material worried by wolf or wild dog. We set sprigs of herbs on lips and chest, flax leaves inscribed with voces magicae in her mouth, pumped her body with all manner of liquids, folded the fabric to contain the reek of urine, a litter of cigarette foils and plastic bread tags about the squalid and terrifying statuettes, daemonia of ebony. And does it fall to me to have to tell you that perfect spot to camp you noticed is actually sewage works? And the reason we don't picnic that far down the lawn is it holds the septic tank. I was all for getting away, but there's a tax on the canals. Break the impartial gaze, and you are merely rummaging in someone else's laundry, handling the already handled with grubby fingers. These items are in no state to be seen. A jumble of tissue and plastic bagged brushes, ephemera tossed to the top of a fly tip, private scents gone up as blushes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and thanks so much for sharing us the project and the incredible work that you've been doing. I love the idea of you turning up regularly at the Lost Property Office to observe, and presumably their utter confusion at having a poet sat in the corner. And thank you. I think we're all really excited to see where that goes next and how it develops. And obviously excited that you're learning Latin and Greek. The more people who get to experience those languages, the better, as far as I'm concerned. So thank you very much. It's been absolutely glorious. So I think I'm going to ask everybody, all the poets now, to put their cameras back on and their mics back on if they can, and we can all be on the screen together. Thank you so much. We've got 10 minutes just to answer any questions that have come in, but I'm going to kick off with a question, which I think is in some ways the question, which is that we always have to ask ourselves, which is why we keep coming back to this ancient material as a way to talk about the world we're in now, because you're all using this material to talk about the now and the lives we are living and the world we are negotiating. And as such, the ancient world is a sort of prism for us to do that. But what perhaps everyone would just like to offer a minute or two on what drew you to using the ancient material as a way to talk about the now. Maybe I'll ask Kim first, if I may.
Yeah, I classics kind of was the thing that made me realize when I was sat reading the Odyssey that there is a kind of thread of shared humanity that doesn't really diminish over time. I was reading the Odyssey and I thought, in places it's funny, and I thought, oh my God, there's still these odd, moments that carry us through. And I really like using bits of the classics, particularly weird bits of the classics, to kind of hold up a mirror. They're quite archetypal, like tarot cards, for instance, which are also archetypes. And weaving those, we can get really, really satisfying stories, I think. And yeah, I think that's why I come back to the classics again and again.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. And everybody has something they read, didn't they? Which was the moment where they went, this speaks to me and I identify with this, even though it's written thousands of years ago. Mehmet, what was the moment for you which made you think, okay, this is a way to write about the now through writing about the Minotaur?
I was looking for somebody to embody the sort of alienation of urban alienation, modern city, having living in London, watching people on the train, etc., and how they become little islands, almost trapped in this huge labyrinth. And of course, I thought it is a labyrinth. And then I remembered as a child, when I first started reading about Greek and Roman myths, about the Minotaur. And I thought everybody's worried about Theseus and so forth. And I was thinking, the poor blighter there, you know, he's neither God nor man nor anything. He's lost, he's trapped. It says he's punished as well. And so I thought, well, that's a bit like the people who are sitting here with me on the 9:23 from Wimbledon to Waterloo. So I envisaged the Minotaur sitting next to me, and I thought, that's it. I'm going to try a couple of Minotaur poems.
That's brilliant. And I think you're right sometimes that by revisiting those stories and shifting where the focus and the emphasis, and that's where the sympathy is, we get to interrogate the assumptions made in those stories. I think it's really interesting now when you share those stories with children and you try and work out which of those assumptions inherent in those narratives you're happy to perpetuate and which you have to challenge as you share the story. But that central metaphor of you know, a city like London as a labyrinth can unlock so much when we sort of let it. Vasiliki, when was your moment of sort of connecting to this material?
When was it? It was something that didn't happen suddenly. It sort of emerged. And then when I thought about it, it was obvious that the Minotaur would be the person. That's it. But as a 10-year-old or 11-year-old, when I was reading sort of the Greek and Roman legends and myths, I always felt sorry for the poor Minotaur. And so suddenly he re-emerged from my 11-year-old persona to not so much an 11-year-old persona, the adult persona.
Brilliant, thank you. And it's interesting, actually, isn't it, that it often takes us back to childhood and our first connections to these stories. I'm going to ask Vasiliki now, if I can. What made you start to connect with particularly the women of ancient literature and bring them into your work?
Well, you know, it's funny because for me, growing up in Greece, we studied mythology as part of the school curriculum. And so I remember reading the myths, which at the time felt more like a mixture of history and fairy tale. And we had to memorize them for as a homework. And this kind of slightly took the fun out of them, you know, because of the regimented and evaluated way in which they were taught. But, you know, there was still a lot of fun of them. Even the Odyssey and the Iliad, which we also had to read and be examined on at school, because they're so dramatic and they're almost like a common language for everybody, because they speak of human experience, and human experience, as I think as Kim said, doesn't change so much over time, even though thousands of years have gone by. I remember spending some time in Germany with a German part of my family when I was about 10 or 11, and I went to school there with my friends, and I was really surprised to see that they were also learning Greek mythology. And then suddenly this became a point of interest and connection with other people, and I think it was then that I started to think about mythology as a way of connecting with people and telling more universal stories that can apply to the now, but also to other times.
Thank you. I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? And I'm really interested in how mythologies include us, but also how they can exclude us, because I think we probably do all learn Greek mythology in England as well as small children at school, but we don't necessarily all have the opportunity to carry on studying, you know, ancient history or Latin or Greek. And so it's a really interesting question about how those mythologies include and how they sometimes exclude in terms of those narratives. I mean, even the nervousness or the worry of mispronouncing a classical name can put people off engaging with certain, you know, stories and types of literature, or make them feel it's not theirs. And I think it's really what I think was wonderful about today's reading is how inclusive it felt, that we all have a place in these stories and these literatures, and that we can all find somewhere where they reflect ourselves. And Matt, you talked a bit about how you came to work on the project you're working on, but then you took a next jump into learning Latin and Greek. Had you always been fascinated by classics, or was this a new thing?
No, I did it to GCSE, and I also did French, and they've been they've kind of stimulated my love of language. I remember using the word via when I was about 10, about kind of going home via an alley and having an argument with a teacher saying no one would say that. And I was like, well, yes, they would. And, you know, it's like there's different angles in, I think, to language. But Vasiliki mentioned After Ovid, and that Ted Hughes book really sort of got me reading the classics, I think. And that was stimulated by a book by Michael Hoffman. And in it, Glyn Maxwell did this play, kind of miniature play about the horses of Achilles speaking. And I thought, well, that's kind of avant-garde. And then I read War Music by Christopher Logue, and that had a horse at the very end saying he won't make old bones. And so then I read the Iliad, and it was, sure enough, they were talking horses, and I just couldn't believe it. I was just going, this is the most modern, you know, immediate, it's the most magical book I've ever read, really. And so I started reading different versions of the Iliad, and then realizing the gaps and differences between them. And it's like the more you look, the closer you look, just the more gaps appear, really. And I think that's where the poetic license is. And I think, so to go back to Glyn Maxwell again, a poem he read at the previous one of these meetings about Cassandra. There's a line in that about Cassandra going, she kind of gets lost. She's going, I remember, but she's talking about the future. And so it's like, for her, is she kind of in the present, future, or past? You know, she's remembering what's already happened. And that's what he's playing with the kind of the tight rhyme scheme, always coming back to where we are now. So I just think the closer you look, the more kind of space there is to kind of explore.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you're talking about how, like, in that poem it's incredible, the line structure just keeps bringing us back to that point of what we may or may not be. And I'm really fascinated, Kim, with what you were doing with form, because within your poems you are not just responding to ancient literature in terms of the content of the stories, but also the form of chorus, and the idea of collective voice, and all the different types of literary structures within, and that feels very, very exciting at the moment when there's a revival of oral work and oral poetry and epic storytelling. And can you just tell us a little bit more about that, because it's quite a strong choice in terms of using dramatic forms on the page. You're doing it brilliantly, but I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, so obviously an inspiration is obviously Anne Carson, who is incredible, and kind of the kind of a Bible for writers, kind of reinterpreting classics. But also I'm a spoken word background. I kind of got into poetry through kind of performance, and I like to play with different voices. I think there's an immediacy in it. And I tend to find that often if you're dealing with different figures in the work, you can spend hours trying to indicate this is what the different, this different person's come on now, or you can go, they've come on. And there is an element, I think, in setting up some of these, as I said, archetypal figures that feels like prodding characters about on a stage. There's an element of asking these figures to repeat their stories. And there's an element of staging in it, I think, inherent in classical reception, it almost feels like. And so adding in those elements kind of felt very natural, really. Sort of the natural conclusion of going, all right, Alexander, it's time for you to come on and tell us something now, you know?
Yeah, and there's a beautiful sort of ventriloquizing in that, isn't there? I mean, that in the most positive sense of allowing yourself to conjure the voices and to embody them, and to give them form in new work, and that links to what Matt was saying about filling in the gaps, that somehow we're taking license to imagine the spaces in between what we've got, or what's left, or the fragmentary text that's left, and re-embody it in that sense. And I was really interested in Vasiliki's poem about Priam's 51st son, about how once we start embodying characters, that we can start to think more fluidly about who they might have, how they might have wanted to be seen, or how they might have presented, and what might be, going on. And it felt very much as a way of speaking about the now. I have to finish now because we're coming up to 3 o'clock, but I would love to be able to continue this conversation, and I'm confident that we will, that now we've set up this series, that hopefully this will become a hub for these conversations to continue. But I need to take time just to thank you enormously for taking an hour out of your hot Monday to come and share new work. It's a real privilege getting to hear stuff that's in progress, and I think it is for everybody who's watching, and for myself hosting. So thank you for your generosity in sharing that, and I hope we get to keep at the APGRD. We'd love to keep in touch with the work as it develops, and support it in any way we can, because obviously the APGRD is an incredible resource. It's an archive of the complete history of creative responses to the ancient world, and as such, I hope it will be an incredible resource for you as the work progresses and continues. So thank you very much, both from the APGRD and from Live Canon, for being with us today. So a big theoretical Zoom round of applause to Mehmet, Kim, Vasiliki, and Matt, from everyone who I know is watching, and thank you very